This happened only a few weeks ago. I'm from Saskatchewan, Canada, where the land is mostly flat where I live, with very few clumps of trees or protection from the elements. A friend and I decided to drive to the neighboring town at around 7 p.m. and negative 30 degrees Celsius outside, and pick up some food and just drive around talking, as we've dozens of times before. It's close to 9 p.m. at this time, and we decided to go looking for this abandoned house that we had found just last year to kill some time. This required going down the back roads, which were fairly clear at the time and not at all blocked. Without luck, we couldn't find the house, but realized that we were only about 30 kilometers away from our town and decided to find another road away from there to avoid going home so early. So we turned right at this intersection, still in the back roads. The road was clear at first, with the railway track a few kilometers down the road. Just past the track, however, the road narrowed drastically and snow had piled up heavily. For more context, my friend was driving a quite small and low car without winter tires and several issues with it. Oh, and we had a quarter tank of gas. I had a bad feeling, but didn't tell her to turn around quite yet, as I thought that maybe the road would clear off. But as we drove, the snow became thicker and harder to traverse. And then we got stuck. I asked if she had a shovel or anything in her car. There was absolutely nothing we could use. She was wearing slides and a thin pair of leggings, and didn't have any winter boots, blankets, gloves, ski pants, or even a snow brush. The car had most of the snow jammed under the front of it, making it difficult to clear away. And between efforts of rocking the car back and forth and picking at snow, she was trying to contact anyone to help. No one would answer, and service was incredibly spotty in the area. Eventually, we managed to get the car unstuck and drive it a few meters before we got trapped again. Rinse and repeat, everything from before, and we were briefly free before being confined again. At this point, the wind was awful. Our feet were damp and her pants were soaked through from laying on the ground. I remember we were told to turn the vehicle off to conserve fuel and start it once an hour for 10 minutes. She agreed and we cut the ignition. Her phone was at 15% and mine at 30%, and we needed to act fast. She went to turn the car on again and it wouldn't start. The amount of dread that hit me was absolutely awful, and there was nothing I could do. We decided to walk back the way we came, where farmhouses would be scattered in the rural area. Halfway back up the road, one of the guys she tried to call called her back and asked where we were. My friend doesn't know directions at all, so I gave the best description I could and had our location sent to him when the services would cut back in. We walked for about a half an hour before we came across an intersection where we camped out until our ride found us. Her phone would cut in and out with the low battery life and extreme cold. I couldn't feel my legs, my hands were numb, and the wind picked up in gusts much worse than before, with us being out in the complete open without any shelter. My eyes began playing tricks on me, and the few trees in the distance began to look like they were moving. Then, the headlights of a truck shone over the horizon, and it was none other than our friend who came to pick us up. We jumped in the box of his truck since that was where there was room available. It was terrifying as we flew down the road in a less than stable vehicle with the snow able to catch it at any time. We reached the car, and the guy got a tow rope set up, then boosted the car. Getting out at this point was the easiest part of the entire ordeal. We gave him whatever cash we had on us for thanks, and then my friend slowly reversed the rest of the way. This was a lesson that we both learned the hard way. While this isn't the scariest thing ever, the utter hopelessness is something I would never wish to experience again. Exposure is a dangerous thing. Please be safe out there and use your judgment to a larger extent than I did. The following story takes place in April of 2010. At that time, I was working as an overnight security guard for a dairy manufacturing facility located in Boyle Heights, California. Having worked there for just over a year, I had grown accustomed to my job and its surrounding environment. or so I thought. The facility was part of a decent-sized industrial area. Directly across from this facility sat a housing development surrounded by a small neighborhood. Although the housing development was called Romana Gardens, it was commonly referred to as the Hazard Projects. This urban nickname was attributed to a local street gang. My means of getting to work either involved public transportation or lengthy recreational walking. Whichever I chose, my trip would always culminate in a shortcut through the back of the Hazard Projects. My mother, who was greatly familiar with this area, would constantly express her concern over me working there. After all, the area was known for its fair share of gang activity. She would even go as far as evaluating my route to work. Once she caught wind of my shortcut, she wasn't exactly thrilled. I'm not suggesting that she had little faith in her son. She was just being a mother. Let me take this opportunity to apologize for any lack of detail when it comes to describing the following incident. Given the circumstances of this situation, I hope you can understand. It was a Friday evening and I was relatively early to work. I was less than a block away from the shortcut with a little over an hour left to spare. Before stepping onto the much-traveled path, I hesitated. I'm not a habitual smoker, yet here I was with an odd craving for a cigarette. I didn't have any on hand and the nearest liquor store was just about a block away. If I would have given in to my usual temptation, I would have avoided the shortcut altogether. Emphasis on the word avoided. I stepped onto the path, preoccupied with my cell phone. I was in the middle of a texting conversation with a friend of mine. Suddenly my path was cut off by a teenage boy riding a scooter. He was no older than 16, Hispanic, roughly 5'3", shaved head and wearing all black baggy clothing. He stared me down intently before asking in an aggressive tone, "Where you stay at, dog?" For those of you who are not familiar with the situation, it usually means bad news. Due to the fact that the little guy was riding a scooter of all things, stupid me had decided not to take him seriously. I ignored his question and tried to walk around him. Once again, he cut off my path and repeated the question. "I'm not from around here. I'm just trying to get to work," I responded in a firm tone. Once again, he stared me down intently. He shot me a look of malicious intent as he responded with, "Well, give me your stuff." That's when I realized that he wasn't alone. His 4 friends, all presumably the same age, revealed themselves at the appropriate time. I acknowledged their presence with a heavy sigh. I responded firmly with, "I'm not giving you my stuff, man." As one of the 4 boys drew closer to the scene, he proclaimed, "Well, if he ain't gonna give it up, let's take it." The odds were obviously not in my favor. Be that as it may, I knew I had no choice but to stand my ground. There was an awkward moment of silence before someone had decided to make a move. Unfortunately, that someone wasn't me. Scooter Boy, the one who had confronted me in the first place, took notice of my cell phone being held in my left hand. He smacked it out of my hand. As it fell to the ground, I stupidly allowed my head to follow its path. Suddenly, my face was met with a right hook. I was circled by the 5 boys as each of them began to strike me on multiple spots in my body. "Get him down!" one of them yelled out in desperation. In my moment, a misplaced awareness, my adrenaline began to run its course. I knew if I was somehow able to prevent them from taking me to the ground, maybe I could have a chance. I began to swing wildly until I hit something. I struck one of the boys on his chin. As he staggered backwards, I grabbed him by his collar and began to repeatedly strike his face without mercy. Why I focused all my aggression on only one of them, I have no clue. Suddenly I felt a great blow to the back of my head. The impact was sufficient enough to knock me off my feet. They had taken me to the ground and began to viciously stomp on my body before blacking out. I remember feeling one of the boys reach into my pants pocket. They made off with my cell phone and wallet. The wallet must have been an incredible steal. After all, it did have $300 in it. When I had regained consciousness moments later, I was able to immediately react to the situation. Once I had become fully aware and decided to assess the damage inflicted on my body while taking in my surrounding area, I wasn't alone. I was cautiously approached by a much older gentleman. Thankfully, his presence was of good intent. He carefully helped me to my feet and looked at me with pity as I told him of the situation. As I began to regain my composure, I had made the sudden realization that my wallet had been stolen. The old man was caught off guard as I began to scream out violent threats intended for my aggressors. He tried to calm me down and suggested that I should just walk away from the situation. At first, I protested. He grabbed me by the shoulder and said in a firm tone, "I know you're angry, but you can't be stupid. You told me your job was around the corner. I suggest you get there and get out. Just walk away." I took his advice with a grain of salt. Before going our separate ways, I had expressed my deepest gratitude. I began to make my way to work trying to collect my thoughts. Suddenly I was met with some outrageous exclamation. The same 5 boys who had attacked me earlier had returned for an encore performance. They wanted the backpack I was wearing. Something both parties had overlooked earlier. Not even 2 minutes earlier, I was ready to fight to retain what was rightfully mine. Let's just say, reality hit me like a ton of bricks. As the 5 boys approached me demanding my backpack, I had realized that I was in no condition to put up a fight. I wish I could tell you that. But East Los is no fairy tale world. I was knocked to the ground. Before taking the backpack, they once again stomped on my body viciously. Getting back on my feet proved to be much more difficult this time around. It didn't help that my sense of equilibrium was completely out of it. Nevertheless, I somehow managed to make it work. In order to gain access to the facility, my coworker would have to unlock the staff entrance gate. Luckily, he had just returned from a perimeter patrol. As he spotted me crossing the street, he approached the gate with a childish smile on his face. Mind you, the streets were dimly lit. When he had noticed my disoriented walking, he assumed I was simply messing around. Once I stepped into the light, his smile quickly faded. He panicked with the lock as he began to frantically ask, "What happened, dude?" Within 10 minutes, a black and white had made its way onto our property. The LAPD had been contacted by my supervisor once he was notified of the incident. I was met by 2 young officers. One took my statement, while the other took a look at my injuries. He strongly suggested that I seek medical attention. For some reason, I tried to reject it. The officer looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Listen, you're in pretty bad shape. You suffered some major head trauma and your nose is broken. How you managed to walk here in your current conditions is a literal miracle, man." I was then transported to White Memorial Hospital. The next thing I remember was waiting patiently in urgent care. The officers who had tended to me earlier were present at the hospital. They were having a lengthy discussion with my examiner just as my mother arrived. She was accompanied by my uncle, aunt, and cousins. The examiner took time to discuss the injuries with my mother and me. He indicated that we were more concerned with the blunt force trauma that I had received to the back of my head. Thankfully, there were no immediate signs of potential brain damage, and the swelling on my face would most likely go down within a couple of days. The following week, I was set up to visit an ENT specialist regarding my broken nose. On top of that, they were going to perform an additional CAT scan for safe measure. A few days after the incident, I had met with my employer, their regional office, which was the size of your local 7-Eleven. Their first course of action was to transfer me to another worksite. My manager had arranged for me to receive a check for compensation. Since then, I have not once returned to that part of the neighborhood. My attackers were never caught, and the identity of the Good Samaritan remains a mystery to this day. My parents were pretty big horse lovers when I was growing up. They had a big 40-foot trailer that was half horse trailer and half camper trailer that they would travel around going to various shows and competitions and stuff. I never got quite that into it, but I definitely have a love for the animals as well. To be honest, I really don't remember how this story starts all that well, as I was fairly young at the time. At the time, my parents had a new horse that they were training to become their main show horse, as their current one was getting up in years and was close to retirement. He was supposedly a purebred Morgan, but something else definitely got into his genetics since he was abnormally large for his breed. I remember being out in the barn one morning helping my parents feed the horses, and there seemed to be some panic in the air. I didn't understand why until they brought in the new horse from the pasture, and his back, left hip, and leg were covered in dried blood. The way our barn was built, the backs of all the stalls opened up into the pastures so the horses could come and go as they pleased, so we figured something must have attacked him while he was outside the previous night. My dad called the vet, and he was there within a half an hour. My dad told him that he figured a coyote or something had got a hold of the horse's back leg. The vet didn't seem to think that was the case, since coyotes don't usually bother horses because they're so much bigger. Either way, they needed to clean up all the blood before they got a good look at the wound. The vet had to sedate our horse as he was clearly still in pain and didn't want anyone touching him. After that, they were able to clean up most of the blood and finally found where it had all come from. The one thing I remember very clearly from this story was the horrified look at the vet's face when he finally found the wound. After a second, he stood up and took a step back, turned to my dad and said, "This definitely wasn't an animal." Instead of scratches or bite marks, what the vet found was an extremely precise and very deep cut into the horse's hip. So deep, he could stick his whole hand inside it, but so precise that if you pushed the skin back together, you could barely tell anything was there. It was as if someone had taken a large watermelon knife and driven it straight into our horse's hip. While the vet stitched up the horse, we searched the whole barnyard and pasture for anything that he could have hurt himself on, but there was nothing. Anything that would have potentially injured a horse, like a bolt sticking out of a gate or something, wouldn't have made such a precise or deep cut. At that point, we all knew this had to be human-inflicted. The horse made a full recovery and went on to win my parents a ton of ribbons in various events, and only passed away recently for unrelated reasons. However, to know that there was some psychopath wandering around our farm in the middle of the night with a large knife like that, it still makes me nervous to be outside at night alone. Who knows what would have happened if he had found someone else first. I used to work at a summer camp in Muskoka, Ontario. While I was technically a camp counselor, I had the added responsibility of performing a lot of maintenance tasks around the property. This was nice because I could still join in on camp activities if I wanted to, or if the kids were acting up, I could just leave it to everyone else to deal with and go cut grass or hide out in the workshop tinkering with stuff for a bit. I probably had the best job there, to be honest. The camp was located on the shoreline of a massive lake. There were 2 rows of cabins with a path between them, leading down to the water where our dock jutted out into the lake. This is where we kept all of our small sailboats, our rescue boat, which was a Boston whaler, and a couple of sea-doos. Behind where the cabins were was mostly forest except for the 5-kilometer trail that led back out to the main road with a few cottages on it. A little ways up this trail there was a clearing where the staff all kept their cars and where the buses would park. There was also a large barn that we used as a workshop to build picnic tables and other things the camp might need. We also kept our 2 ATVs, a John Deere Gator, and a Kubota L Series tractor with a few attachments in there. These were mostly used to move things around the camp and for various maintenance jobs. Changeover was probably the best time to be there. It was when the previous group of kids had all left, but the next group hadn't arrived yet, so we pretty much had the whole place to ourselves for the weekend. We would usually bust our butts all day Saturday to get all the actual work out of the way so that we could spend the night partying and just sleep most of Sunday. There's one changeover weekend, though, that none of us will ever forget. It started out normally. All the kids loaded onto the buses, the cabins were checked and cleaned while I took the Gator and a trailer into the woods to collect more firewood, just like we had done hundreds of times. When I returned from my expedition, I grabbed an axe from the barn and began splitting the logs I had cut up with the chainsaw, when one of the other staff members comes on the radio. "Hey, did anybody else hear that noise out in the lake?" she asked. I admitted that I hadn't, but judging by the responses of the rest of the staff, they had all heard it. I figured it was just a moose calling across the lake, and I didn't hear it because the barn was further back than all the other buildings. I continued chopping and stacking firewood in the back of the barn, and after I was done, I took my toolbox and got one of the ATVs and drove down to the cabins. By this point, the other staff had finished cleaning, and all I really had to do was make a few minor repairs and we would be done for the night. At dinner that night, all anyone could talk about was the mysterious noise out in the lake. They described it as sounding like a very distorted elephant call. We all sort of laughed it off, though, as the alcohol was starting to sink in, and no one really took it seriously. As the only sober one left, it was my responsibility to start the fire that night. I brought the gator down with a load of wood in the dump box and began to light the fire while everyone else cleaned up from dinner inside. Slowly, the other staff finished up and began to trickle out to join me at the fire pit. It was a full moon, and the fire pit was right next to the lake, so you could see all the way across. The lake almost seemed to glow in the moonlight, and the twinkle of the lights from the cottages on the other side made the whole scene quite magical. Everyone sat around the fire drinking and laughing, telling stories of who their favorite kid was, or which kid they hated the most, basically talking about exactly what you would expect camp counselors to talk about when not on duty. Later that night, one of the girls brought out her guitar and sang for us while the impromptu couples of the night cuddled around the fire. I, of course, always seemed to be left out of the hookup culture around the camp. Maybe it was because of my role. They saw me as a more senior staff member. I don't know. Either way, none of the girls ever wanted to hook up with me. As a result of not being otherwise engaged in romance as the music played, I gazed out across the lake. I could see the navigation lights of a small boat coming towards us from across the lake, and as it drew closer, I could hear the engines and it sounded like it was going at full throttle. I ignored it for a while as this part of the lake had pretty high boat traffic since it was possible to drive into town by boat through here, so seeing a boat late at night wasn't out of the ordinary. What was out of the ordinary was when the boat got closer to shore and didn't seem to show any signs of slowing down. I pointed this out to one of the guys sitting next to me and he stood up to look. A few others joined him and even the girl playing guitar stopped and turned around. With the music stopped, we all could hear the boat engine running at full RPM as it headed for shore. There was a loud crack as the boat hit the dock of a neighboring cottage, which deflected it back towards us where it missed the beach entirely and ran up on the rocks a little ways down the shore and out of sight from us. The engines sounded awful as they were now out of the water and sucking air, but they didn't turn off or even idle down. Because of this, I immediately assumed the driver had to be unconscious, and I grabbed a first aid kit out of the main cabin, as well as the keys from the Boston Whaler, and ran down to our dock. A few of the other staff who were relatively sober came with me as we cast off and drove a little ways down the shoreline to the runaway boat. When we got there, one of the other staff jumped on board and immediately shut the engines down. Using the searchlight on our boat, we could now get a good look at this mystery boat. It was an older Sea Ray bowrider and looked pretty trashed. The windshield on the driver's side had been smashed and the back of the driver's seat had been ripped off and was laying on the floor near the back of the boat. There also seemed to be blood splattered across the rear of the boat and over top of the engine compartment. The most disturbing part, though, was that no one was on board. From the evidence that we had seen, it appeared as though the driver had been ripped out of the boat by something while driving at full speed. We called 911, and when the police arrived, they determined that the boat could still float, and we helped them tow it over to our dock where they could get a better look at it. They figured some cottager had been driving recklessly out on the lake and had been thrown from the boat, and we all agreed that seemed like the most logical explanation. A search was put out for a missing person on the lake that night, and within an hour, a helicopter was hovering over the lake scanning it with a searchlight. The next day, the police were able to track down the owner of the boat who came to inspect it. Him and his whole family were accounted for, so none of them had been the person driving the boat the previous night. Someone had stolen this poor man's boat and had been ripped out of it while trying to get away. That's when I remembered the distorted elephant noise the other staff had been talking about. The damage to the boat did look an awful lot like some large creature had taken a swipe at the boat and ripped the driver right out. I kept my thoughts to myself as I didn't want to look stupid, but later that night after the police had the boat hauled away, another one of the staff mentioned the same theory, that whatever had made that noise had attacked the stolen boat and killed the driver. Or maybe the driver was trying to get away from the creature and had stolen the boat as a means of escape. We all talked about the incident for weeks after that, speculating on what happened. Given the circumstances and local legends, our running theory is that some unfortunate soul ran across a Wendigo in the woods, and in their attempt to escape had found this boat with the keys in it, but was ripped from the boat as they were taking off from the dock, leaving the boat to continue on with no driver, as the person was devoured. I moved in my first apartment on Pearl Street in June 2008. I was almost 24 years old. I was done with college and was renting the apartment from one classmate that I had met at Eastern Maine Community College. I was going to live by myself. Immediately, I could feel some residual energy on this apartment. It was faint. I didn't think much of it. By autumn, the residual energy slowly got stronger. Every day, I lived with a ghost. The experiences varied depending on whether I went to work or not that day. All of these experiences wouldn't happen every single day, but I'll do my best to explain. Now, my day at work. I worked at Wendy's 4 p.m. to midnight. I'd be home around 1 or 2 in the morning, depending on how well the close went. When I got home, I never turned on lights because the street lights outside were enough. I would go upstairs to my bedroom, which was a sharp left from the top of the stairs, to change my clothes, lounge pants, and a comfortable t-shirt. I go to the bathroom to pee. Before I even step foot to the bathroom, at the door immediately at the top of the stairs, I'd pause as if someone was there, finishing up in the toilet or at the sink. I could sense an old lady. In my mind, I pictured a skinny lady with curly white hair. I had to tell myself that there was no one in the bathroom. All the while I'm standing in front of the toilet, I feel like I'm intruding. I just ignored it and brushed it off. After I'm all done, I head downstairs to the living room, lock the front door that is immediately at the bottom of the stairs, and head right to the living room. I sit at the couch, sitting against the wall directly across the room from the entrance I walk through. I turn on the TV, watch a movie or TV show on DVD, and play on my laptop to unwind. I'd stay up till about 4 a.m. with nothing else weird through the night. Now on my day off, I'd wake up pretty well rested in the morning between 9 a.m. to 10 a.m., rush to the bathroom, stand in front of the toilet, and take a shower. I wouldn't sense anything. Then I would head to the kitchen to make breakfast. The kitchen was a straight shot through the dining room, by way of double-wide archway of the living room and dining room to a small arch in the corner of the dining room. As I walked into the kitchen, I noticed that the cabinet above the washer and dryer in the far back right corner would be opened. I never used or stored anything in these cabinets because they were full of stuff like junk that the landlord never took care of that apparently belonged to a former tenant. So I had no business opening it and never did. I'd just shrug off the incident and cook my scrambled eggs and wheat toast with butter and strawberry jam. Lastly, I'd grab a tall glass of orange juice and head to eat in the living room on the couch in front of the TV. After breakfast, I'd have the TV playing in the background as I browsed the internet. I remained on the couch. Out of nowhere, my cat, Amika, would all of a sudden jump from the top of the upper cabinets, right on the floor, and bolt it in a blur through the dining room and through the living room. Ridiculously quick, turn 180 degrees and continue sprinting up the stairs. At the same time, Amika begins running across the apartment. I could faintly hear the rattling of dishes being rinsed to be put in the dishwasher. I peeked over at the kitchen from the living room. There's a clear view of the sink. I'm certain I see the faucet running. A double take, and it's off. From then on, I can feel an old lady walking around the apartment going about her day. Throughout the day, I'd periodically feel her sitting next to me on the couch. I'd see the couch slightly dip, and she sits. I didn't react very much as there was no threat in this sort of energy. I don't think she knew she had a roommate. I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it. I felt as if I did, I might stir up something. After a while, I realized the energy next to me isn't there, and her presence would almost fill the whole apartment, but be centralized in my bedroom. When I would go upstairs to use the bathroom, I could almost see the old lady floating in the middle of the room, as she was sitting in a chair. The best way I can describe it was white, but a transparent shadow. Inside the shadow, my bedroom looked a little distorted. Again, she never felt threatening, so I wasn't scared. I go back downstairs. The energy stayed the same for most of the day. Every once in a while, I would use the bathroom. I felt like I wasn't the only one using it. When it came time for bed, it would be around 1 o'clock in the morning. If I head upstairs to go to bed, I could sense that the old lady's presence was in the bedroom on the other side of the bathroom. Often, the sense would be so strong I'd have to check the room for an intruder. Of course, aside from the presence, the room was completely empty. Then I'd not experience anything while I slept. Now a sort of energy shift. The roommate scenario lasted slightly under a year. Then the energy changed to a little bit annoyed and borderline angry. Her routine didn't change. My routine didn't either. One day while I was sitting on the couch, there was a loud crash in the kitchen. It sounded like tons of dishes fell and shattered on the floor. Thinking it was the cat, I'd rushed over to the kitchen to see how much broke. The kitchen was as spotless as I'd left it the day before. After the dishes fell, manifestations of the old lady would appear in the bathroom mirror. I never turned the lights on. Nearly every time I used the bathroom, especially in the morning and late at night, she would be directly behind me, kind of looked like she just stepped out of the shower. She always had an awful scowl on her face, a mixture of livid and confusion. It was very unsettling. One night I glanced at the dark mirror. I didn't see my reflection. I saw hers. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Then the final straw that made me feel like it's probably best that I move out. In the very early hours of the morning, probably around 3 a.m., I am certain I'm awake. I'm facing the wall, as my bed is in the corner of the bedroom, and I feel like I'm being watched. I turn over, and standing in my doorway to my room is the old lady, clear as day, but slightly opaque. Her pearl necklace was awkwardly bright. She had that livid and confused look on her face. Her energy was mean, very mean. "I can live here too," I whispered. Her energy didn't believe it so. That was the only time I saw the full-bodied apparition, but I knew then I wasn't welcome anymore. I tried to ignore it as I did like the apartment, but the energy was getting to be very depressing and it was beginning to take its toll on me. I then moved out in July of 2010. I want to start by saying this has been the only time I've ever been close to anything paranormal. I do believe in ghosts, but I also believe there can be, most of the time, good explanations. That being said, here's my short personal experience. Before I moved to San Diego, California, I used to visit here mostly every other month along with my family, mostly for shopping or just hanging by the beach. On our way back east, we'd do our last stop at this very old Ross in La Mesa. One of these occasions, and probably the last one, I was around 9 years old. I was looking at the toy section, playing with some Hot Wheels, when I got nature's call. The only customer, unisex, single restroom, was just a few feet away. I walked towards it. Some old lady, too, hurried to use it, but before either of us could even grab the handle, some kid looking around 6 to 7 years old made his way in without even looking at us. Little idiot, I thought. 5 minutes passed by, and the lady and I kept glancing at each other, wondering whether the kid had gotten injured or something. There was no sound coming from inside, no flushing. Silence. As we got tired of waiting, the lady got a hold of some employee walking by. Excuse me," she said. There's some kiddo inside the restroom, and it's been a while." Without hesitation, the employee grabbed some keys from his pocket, but he didn't need them. the door was never locked. He opened it, and to our surprise, the restroom had always been empty. Now you could ask yourself, maybe the kid went out and we never noticed. But I remember we were facing the door all the time, and even if we weren't, I remember that door to be really noisy when swung. Secondly, that was the only entry. No other door or anything related, plus the kid was too small to climb into some vent. Besides, the lady was just as shocked as I was, so I never imagined it. Only a year or so, I decided to visit that Ross again. I went to that restroom and stayed there for a little while, checking for any doors or any place some kid could hide in, but it was just a plain, dirty restroom. So who was that kid? So this incident happened 78 years ago, and only a few people will believe what happened to me on this icy, snowy night. So I worked 45 minutes away from where I was living at that time. I worked at a pizza restaurant and was one of those lucky people that had to help close. When me and my other two coworkers left, we were stuck in front of the building for a while trying to get the snow and ice off our cars. We weren't used to the weather because we lived in Texas, so the ice and snow was a new thing for me. Never had to drive in that kind of weather until then. After I got my windshield cleaned off, I contemplated driving to my place 45 minutes away or going to my parents' house that was 3 minutes away, and they had my sister's old room that still had her bed. Decided not to risk my life and called my parents to make sure it was okay for me to come over. Of course they said yes, and I drove slowly to their house. As soon as I got inside, I got ready for bed and went to sleep. I'm unaware of the time I ended up waking up, but I remember it was in the middle of the night. I don't know why I woke up. All I knew next, after I was aware I was awake, I felt hands on both of my feet, being pulled by them at the end of the bed. I honestly didn't know what to do, so I froze and started panicking, but I tried my best not to let whatever know that I was. After a few seconds that I felt like minutes, the tugging stopped. I finally started to calm down when I felt something slide up next to me and wrap its arm around me. No one else could have been in that room with me. My parents' room was in the back of the house, and the room I was staying in was on the side close to the front. My brother's room was next to the one I was in, but he's a heavy sleeper and never woke up to get in bed with someone. He was never that kind of kid. So I was very confused to feel what was going on and started panicking again. Next thing I know, I hear a little boy giggle, like around the age of 5 to 7. Funny story is, 8 years before then, I was in a car accident with my family and lost my brother. And ever since then, I've noticed a couple of things, but never thought anything of it. To be honest, I thought it was him that was with me, but I was so terrified, I passed out from being scared and woke up to my alarm the next morning to get ready for work. I told my parents what happened that night, and they looked at me like I was crazy. I told my sister, and she said she experienced something close to that, but she sensed an older woman. I'm now 26 and see things here and there, almost every place I go, and can't really talk to anyone about it without being made fun of. I wanted to get this story out that happened to me because I listen to your podcasts and videos on YouTube, and it gave me the courage to get my story out there. I now live at the same home, but different bedrooms, and still have unexplained things happen to me every now and then. Let's just say I'm not as scared anymore. All the way back in 2009, I was spending the summer in my high school band room. I was a sophomore without any friends, and I thought joining band council as the historian, person who takes photos of the band events, could break me out of my shell and I would meet some new people. Sure enough, this is how I met my best friend, who I now consider a sister. I'll call her Kay, for privacy or whatever. So Kay and I headed off right away, both being huge nerds who loved all things cats, Halloween, and photography. As I spent more and more time with her, I also became familiar with her mother, a kind-hearted woman who always seemed ready to help us on any crazy adventure we had planned. Whether it be helping us afford stuff, giving us rides, supplying snacks, you name it, she was there. She also helped me on a more personal level. My family was not destitute, however, we didn't have a lot in the way of spending money, so a lot of the time I just made do with whatever I had. When Kay's mom saw me shivering at late-night marching band rehearsal because all I had was a thin sweater, she bought me a jacket. When I was running around barefoot at car washes because the only shoes I owned were sneakers I didn't want to get wet, she bought me sandals. I'm telling you all this because I want you to understand. This woman was almost like a second mother to me. She gave me a job at her pet-sitting business when I couldn't get work due to my social anxiety, allowing me to work with the animals and never having to speak with their owners. She seemed to really care about me. Now, about 2 years ago, Kay got married and I was her maid of honor. I worked very hard alongside Kay and her mom, trying to plan and ease stress on Kay wherever I could. We were a good team and everything seemed to be going smoothly. The day of the wedding came, the bridal party, we were all getting ready, laughing, having fun. I made mimosas on the floor into red Solo cups. Not important, I just think it's funny. And Kay's mom sat in the corner, looking stormy. This was very unusual for her. I had never seen her like this. I tried to invite her over, smiling in her direction, trying to include her in the conversation, offering her floor mimosa, but she wasn't having it. She continued to sulk. I left to change into my dress, and when I got back, Kay rushed over to me, pulling me back into the bathroom. She told me that she tried to talk to her mom, but her mom said that she wasn't going to tell her what was wrong. She was upset, yes, but refused to say why. Kay asked me to talk to her mom for her, so I went into the main room and went to stand next to Kay's mom. "If she's upset, I don't want to know," she said very matter-of-factly to me. "Well, she is upset, but only because—" "Well, she should be." I was taken aback. I didn't even get to finish my sentence. This woman had never so much as tissed in my general direction, and all of a sudden she was full-on yelling at me. I asked her if she wanted to step outside and talk about what was wrong, but she refused, just yelling me about how we were so inconsiderate, so mean and unthoughtful. I asked her what she was talking about, and do you know what she responded? "You didn't get me any coffee." Coffee? She didn't even like coffee. You see, that morning, Kay's mom had left for the venue early to watch over some setting up of things, while Kay and I went to a separate location to get ready with the rest of the girls and take some pictures. On the way, we stopped and got coffee. I happened to be on the phone with one of the other girls, trying to give her directions, and we got her a coffee too. When we got to the location, we all started to get ready, and Kay's mom showed up a little later, and that's when she started sulking. I asked her to clarify. Was I hearing her right? Yes, she was in fact standing in the middle of the room in front of everyone on her daughter's wedding day, yelling at me because we hadn't thought to call and ask her if she wanted coffee. I was so stunned. I couldn't even think what to say. What was happening? I tried to apologize, but she refused to accept. I tried to calm her down, talk to her, but she wouldn't stop. She started yelling that she was going to leave. Finally, I gave up. I looked her in the eyes and I said, "Fine, you can leave the room, but I want you to realize this is how you're choosing to behave on today of all days. This is what you chose." And she left. I looked around at the other people in the room, the photographers, the other girls, all stunned, speechless. Kay came out of the bathroom, crying. I tried to comfort her, telling her her mom was probably just upset because of something going wrong at the venue or whatever. Weddings can be stressful after all. But Kay told me that no, this was normal behavior for her mom. I guess her mom, the woman that I thought to always be so kind, was prone to flying into rages, screaming and ranting for hours on end about almost anything. What I had just experienced wasn't even that bad in comparison. "Why do you think I always try to get out of the house?" Kay sniffed. She cried the rest of the morning. I've been having nightmares about being stuck in a situation with this woman where she's screaming at me, telling me how horrible of a person I am, attacking me ever since. I can't believe I was so completely taken in by her. I wish Kay had told me so I could have helped her sooner. Anyway, that's the story of how I was the worst maid of honor in history. Now, it's not spooky or scary, but unsettling to know that someone you trust so completely could turn out to be so utterly insane. For privacy reasons, I won't use real names. I downloaded an app to meet new friends. It is open to all. You can meet anyone from anywhere. I matched with a woman. I'll call her Cora. She is 31 years old and she said she's from Australia. I am 21 from an Asian country. Meeting people and being friends with them is absolutely what I love, no matter how old you are or where you're from. So meeting Cora is not something special for me, although she is the only one whom I matched whose age is like a mom already. Anyway, I said hi to her and she replied with a long message telling me that she's not from Japan and that she's from Australia and she wants to be my friend and that she's sorry. Now, I'm going to tell y'all quickly that in my bio on that app, I said that I want to meet Japanese friends because I'll be visiting Japan this year. I wanted to meet them and hang out, but I also stated that I am open for other nationalities because I like meeting new friends. It's cool to have a friend from a different country, at least for me. Now back to the story, she kept saying she was sorry for not being Japanese, and that she really wants to be my friend. I said it's okay, that I could be her friend. I asked her Instagram so that we can continue talking on there. She said, "Why not Facebook? Are you hiding something?" Now I was shocked, like, why are you saying that? And the first red flag started to slap my face. "No, it's just that I'm much more active on Instagram," I replied. She says that she wants to be my friend for maybe 1,000 times, and not gonna lie, it started to actually freak me out. I then kept chatting with her because I didn't want to be rude. The messages just became creepier and I started to feel uneasy and I just wanted to stop, and so I did. I figured we just met and I didn't tell her anything personal about me, so there's not going to be any repercussions. I was wrong. After an hour, I received a friend request on Facebook from Cora, and it sent chills up my spine. How did she find me? I didn't give her my full name, and I was using my nickname on the app. I blocked her, and about 30 minutes later, she followed me on Twitter, and then on Instagram. I blocked her there too. I started to panic. What if her profile is fake? What if she's a poser? What if she lives near me? What if she tries to harm me? Stuff like that started to blow through my mind. I then decided to delete my profile on that app, and I stopped using it for a while. It's been a month now since that happened, and I low-key freak out whenever a Cora name pops up on my screen on several social medias I use, like on the who to follow thing on Twitter and friend suggestions from Facebook. Maybe someday I'll download that app again, but we'll be very careful in communicating with strangers.
There's a lot that happens within our family before this event, so let me explain. My mom's brother, who, for the sake of this story I'll call Clark, has been married to this woman for over 20 years now, and they have one child together. Growing up, I've always been told that my aunt was a little off, and I was instructed by my mother to stay clear of her if I ever had the chance. She seemed pretty normal to me until I was around 10 years old, and she started harassing my mother and my grandparents. She would hit on my grandfather and show up to their house unannounced, and would occasionally try to start fights with them. We had to block her on all of our phones, and my uncle was told that she's no longer allowed on ours or our grandparents' property. Years had gone by without much issue towards us, but for the past few years, she has been mentally abusing my uncle along with my cousin, and once in a fit of rage, she actually peed on the floor in front of my cousin. Yes, full-on squatted and relieved herself. My cousin has since moved out. With all the background information out of the way, let's get to the actual story. It was Christmas Eve about a year ago, and as for tradition, we were having dinner at my grandparents' house. It was my grandparents, mom, dad, brother, uncle, cousin, and their dog Holly. We're at the dinner table, which is in view of the front porch windows, when we hear the doorbell ring furiously and the door being pounded on. As we looked over at the windows, who do we see? Her. My uncle gets up and goes outside to talk to her. From the table, we can hear a bit of yelling and my uncle opens the door to come back in when all of a sudden she grabs the dog and then threatens to take it away if my uncle didn't give her the money that she wanted. At this point, my parents are outside watching all of this along with a few neighbors. My uncle gets in the car with her, and before she gets in to drive, she then yells, "What the hell are you looking at? I know I'm beautiful, and God loves me." Then she gets in the car and speeds off. So we're all at the windows, just stunned and absolutely confused, all the while my cousin is texting his father to make sure he's okay. He lets us know that he is and that he was going to an ATM to get her some money so that they would leave her alone. About an hour or so later, my uncle gets back with the dog and tells us that she was basically holding him hostage because he didn't give her enough money. But finally, with a bit of bribing, she brought him back, and I haven't seen her since. The rest of the night obviously had a lot of tension, and I watched the road behind us all the way home, scared that she was following us. Since the incident, things have escalated at their house. We have found out that she's doing drugs and has been cheating on my uncle for a while now. For those asking why we didn't call the cops, he told us not to. I don't really know why, but he hasn't really done much about her, except tell her that he wants a divorce, but nothing's come of that. So, to my really crazy aunt who's pretty much threatened my entire family, please, let's not ever meet again. I attended what was expected to be a super fun party ringing in 2015 at a close friend's home. I expected to be awake until dawn, so I made sure to eat a really big dinner and arrived late to the party around 11 p.m. with two of my best friends. We were a pretty tight-knit social group, and despite the party being a combination house show with several bands playing, I knew virtually all of the 60 or so people who were already there when I arrived. Among friends and acquaintances, everyone was celebrating, drinking, and generally having a really great time. I had planned to meet up with some other friends at around 2 a.m. when they were done bartending a public event, so I was drinking socially but in moderation. I'm no stranger to the sauce, and I have a healthy tolerance. By midnight, the party had grown to at least 100 people, and by this time there were people drifting in from neighboring parties and the surrounding university area, despite attempts to limit attendees to people we actually knew. I opened my third beer at around 1 a.m. and continued taking photos, snaps, and messaging other friends who were not there. Around 1:30 a.m., I started to feel really drunk, and thinking that perhaps I was just overwhelmed by the constant activity all around me. I stepped into the mostly empty living room for a breather and to message my friend. I sent her a message inviting her to the party, as we had planned on meeting up. As I finished my message, I felt someone come up behind me. He then pressed his body against me as he gripped my hip. As I straightened up, I could feel him bending down slightly to whisper into my ear. But it wasn't a whisper. He then clearly said to me,
"In a few minutes, you aren't going to remember a single thing. And then, I'm going to rape the hell out of you."
I froze. It hit me. I wasn't feeling really drunk. The confusion I had attributed to social anxiety or the large crowd, I was experiencing because I had been drugged. I knew I had only moments to prevent the inevitable. I ran from him best I could and didn't turn around. I went and retrieved my purse and jacket and started calling the 2 people that I meant to meet up with at 2 a.m. I was so out of it that I was having a hard time communicating what was happening. I started crying and moving throughout the house, trying to find someone that I could explain it to. I was way too disoriented. Thankfully, friend number 1 was able to leave from bartending early and came to get me. He called me as I ran outside, and the creepy guy literally chased me. I got to my friend's car, and as I started to black out, he said the creepy guy was trying to wave him down, shouting to him that he was my friend and was going to take me home. Friend number 1 told me that I just kept saying, "Drive, drive," over and over again. And he took me home where we met up with friend number 2, who was bartending the event. At 2:30 a.m., I lost consciousness and remained unconscious for 5.5 hours. They were shaking me, trying to get some kind of reaction. Nothing. I didn't respond in any way. They sat up with me throughout the night to make sure I was okay. Around 7 a.m., I somehow managed to get up and climb into my bed. At 9 a.m., I awoke and I had no idea where I was. I was so relieved to discover that I was safely at home. I think I was high for a total of 20 hours, and I didn't really feel normal again for several days. I don't think I'll ever know who drugged me, and I only have a vague description to work from. I'm really fortunate and very grateful to have my friends. Be careful out there. When I was 13, the dawning of a new millennium took place on New Year's Eve. While people were fearing for the worst with the Y2K bug or out partying and drinking, I was home alone. In 1996, my parents had split up, and from there they divorced, and my mother and I moved across the country from Oregon to Tennessee with her best friend. On the eve of the year 2000, I was home alone and my mother was currently out of state. Now, this really didn't worry me as this wasn't the first time. I often came home to find a note on the kitchen counter saying that they had gone to Florida for a few days and that there were groceries in the fridge. Since the divorce, she was regularly leaving me alone for really long periods of time to go to Florida. We lived on a relatively quiet road surrounded by trees and set a few miles out of town. And I knew most of the people, if not by name, then by face, enough to wave and small chat with, and had never before been given a reason to be afraid of being alone. On the night in question, I was staying up late watching television. I had most of the lights on in the house. Not because I was afraid, but because at 13 I wasn't really concerned with the electricity bills or saving the environment. I felt completely safe and protected within my little bubble of home. As I was watching the movie, I kept hearing these weird noises outside, but I remember thinking it was probably just the neighbors. Though they weren't extremely close, a couple of them were having a party / had people over for the holiday. About halfway into the movie, however, the power in the house suddenly went dead. I sat on the couch for a minute, just sort of in a panic daze, because it was near midnight and pitch black. I remember thinking that the power must have gone out and that it would just come back on, so I just decided to sit on the couch with my blanket and just wait. A few minutes passed by when I heard a noise in the kitchen, where the back door is. My heart started racing in my chest because I thought it sounded like the back door being shut. The back door sits just off in the dining room, which is connected to the kitchen, which leads directly into the living room, where I was currently sitting on the couch. A few seconds passed after I had heard the sound, and I was straining my ears to pick up anything that wasn't supposed to be there. Every noise suddenly felt magnified. When footsteps sounded on the floor, I immediately slithered off the couch onto all fours, crawled around the ottoman, and started as slowly and as quietly as I could make my way toward the space between the love seat and the couch. I knew I could fit under the side table and be completely hidden by the dark and the ottoman from playing hide-and-go-seek in the dark many times with my friends during sleepovers. I was nearly there when the footsteps became more apparent. I knew from the sound of them that whoever it was making their way through the kitchen, now toward the living room where I was. They weren't hurried or anything. It was like they were just moving around in the kitchen. I then glanced up from where I was crouched on the floor, and to my horror, there was a dark silhouette standing in the archway between the two rooms. To my credit, I didn't scream. However, I did panic. I stood immediately to my feet from my hiding spot and ran down the hallway. And I believe the only reason I wasn't overcome was because the person chasing me had to get around the ottoman in the dark to follow me. I did what all children do when they're afraid, and I bypassed the front door, the guest room, the bathroom, and ran to the farthest door down the hallway. My room. In all honesty, I probably wouldn't have been able to get the front door unlocked and open in time, as it was right off to the side of the couch. When I was 10, I got a bird for my birthday. He was a blue-fronted Amazon, and I named him Boo because it was October and close to Halloween. Boo had a large iron cage. It was kept in my room. This information will become relevant later in the story. As I ran into the room, I slammed the door shut and then locked it. However, the lock was simply one of those little turn knobs that you can easily pop with a butter knife. I had barely gotten the door shut and locked when the person on the other side knocked on it. I have no idea why they knocked, if they did it to mock me or to scare me, but I knew in my heart that my little lock was not going to keep whoever it was on the other side out of my room. It didn't keep my mother out when we were arguing, and it wouldn't stand up to brute force. I was panicking, on the verge of tears, when the person started laughing. It was low, quiet. It wasn't like manic laughter, but as if they were genuinely amused. It was the laughter that really frightened me, and I started heavily, hysterically crying and looking around my room trying to figure out what the hell I could do. That was when I realized Boo's cage would fit almost perfectly between the door and the wall of my closet. The cage moved quietly on my carpeted floor, but as I pushed it into place, it scraped against the door and alerted whoever it was on the other side that I was trying to barricade myself in. Because suddenly they then threw themselves at my door, and you could hear the sound of the wood splintering and the door handle being twisted so violently. Boo, who had been stirred by the movement awake, began literally screaming and flapping his wings. I might have even screamed with him, but honestly, I don't really remember screaming. I just remember being extremely terrified. Terrified, I crawled under my bed and waited. Several minutes passed, and the person eventually stopped attacking my door. Boo continued screaming even after he had stopped. Though being under my bed gave me no feeling of being secure, I didn't come out from under it because I simply had nowhere else to go. I thought about trying to go out the window, but I was afraid he might expect it, and therefore be waiting for me on the other side, and it was also several feet off the ground, as the house was built on a raised foundation. I remember laying under my bed, just terrified, for what felt like hours. I must have fallen asleep because I awoke in the next morning to daylight. The fear of what happened came back to me as soon as I registered where I was and why, and scared that whoever had been in my house might still be there. I then decided to crawl out the window and run to a neighbor since it was daylight outside, and therefore I felt less afraid. Crawling out a window is a lot harder than it looks, and I did it less than gracefully, as I was not and still am not the most coordinated human being. Once I was back on my feet, however, I carefully made my way around the house, and that's when I noticed the back door was wide open. Still pretty scared, but feeling braver now that I was outside and that it was morning instead of pitch black night, I walked up the back steps and peered inside. Seeing nothing out of the ordinary, I decided to go back inside. Looking back now, I really cringe on how stupid this could have turned out, and I really wish that I could have told my younger self to make the smarter move and just go get help. But thankfully, no one was inside the house. I did a terrifying, heart-pounding room-to-room check, looking in closets and under the beds, even behind the couch, anywhere that I thought even a small child might be able to fit. I even popped the lock on my mom's bedroom so that I could check it, and then relocked it afterwards. When I was absolutely positive there was no one there, I then went back to lock the back door and noticed that the breaker box on the opposite wall was also open. The main switch had been pulled. I flipped it back on, locked both locks on the back door, checked all the windows and front door, and then called my mom, where I once again broke down crying hysterically. She called a coworker who came and stayed the entire day with me as they drove back. My mom still took random trips to Florida after that, but I always went with her from then on forward. So terrifying, laughing, crazy person that broke into my house on New Year's Eve. Please, don't ever come back. I sincerely hope no other young girl had to meet you either. I don't really know if you were just some drunk visitor of a neighbor, but you terrorized me that night. I was really afraid of being alone when my mom was working, and to this day, I still get scared when I am home alone. I overthink what I would do if someone came inside and where I would hide. Whenever my cats make a noise out of nowhere, I immediately investigate for fear it's someone trying to get in. I'm really glad I survived that night. Ask FM was a website where people can ask you questions either anonymously or not, which you can answer on your public profile for everyone to see. When the website was gaining popularity, I was pretty active on there from when I was around 13 to 15 years old. All was good and well. I made quite a few friends that I'm still in contact with now at 22, and I had lots of fun. I Skyped with most of these friends on the regular, and I even went to a concert in Berlin with one of them in around 2013. It was amazing. That is, until I started getting weird questions and messages from a new account concerning my fear of clowns, which I had only talked about privately after answering one of the questions months ago and then deleting it shortly after. The account had a clown profile pic and a username which referenced my name, and sent loads of questions and messages containing personal information that I never disclosed on my profile. At first, I just kinda thought it was a tasteless prank from a dude I was kinda friends with, but it wasn't. I was really annoyed and announced that I'd leave Ask for a few weeks because I was no longer comfortable logging in and seeing these messages. Soon afterwards, my friends texted me about the weird messages that they had received from my profile. I changed my password after realizing my account had been hacked and then apologized to the people for the weird stuff that they had gotten from my account. Immediately, the clown profile then sent me messages saying he'd leave my Ask profile alone if I accepted his request on Skype. But I wasn't using Skype regularly anymore. I declined, and after not hearing from him for a few days, I thought that was it. When I logged into Skype the next time though, I suddenly had 5 new accounts in my contacts that had all messaged me telling me to reply or else. Of course, all of them had clown profile pics, and I told him to leave me alone. I wasn't interested in having any form of contact with him. He then sent me screenshots of him texting with my friend from Berlin about meeting up sometime, and told me that if I really valued her, I would message him back whenever he messaged me on Skype or Ask. I was extremely weirded out and scared at this point, and then deleted my Ask account, but I never even thought about going to the police because I was just a 14-year-old girl at this point, and what would the police even do about it? Clown Dude made a new account in my name with my picture and everything, talking weird crap again, posting weirdly edited versions of my profile pics and everything. So at this point, I'm just like, screw it, I don't care anymore. I let him do his thing and then deleted his accounts from my Skype contacts. He hacked back into my account and then accepted his requests a few times though. I made a new account and added my friends on there, but still use my old account like once a week just to keep this guy at bay basically. I was still super scared and confused, but I was just like, whatever. He's just a stupid internet Rambo trying to harass young girls into talking to him. Just ignore him and gradually stop replying. Surely he'll go away. That went pretty well until he posted a Google Maps screenshot of my house on Ask, and then a friend asked me if it was really my house. And for sure, it was. I was absolutely terrified, and I didn't know what to do. So I just never really did anything and just kind of sat it out. A friend of mine somehow found out that he lived somewhere in Germany, so not even that far from me, and that scared me even more. But after months of this was apparently the peak of harassment, and it all just stopped. The Ask account was deleted, and I never got any Skype messages from him ever again, and it was finally over. I checked for months after whether he was back or anything, but I never heard anything from this guy again. But to this day, I still have no idea who he was or why he was doing this to me. Please, I repeat, be careful on the internet. I'm a 14-year-old female, and I was on a Discord server. It was a very feminine server with mostly girls and a few guys. Mostly gay, though. That's where I met the predator of our story. He was working for someone to make an art commission for him that he would pay in Robux. It was also a Roblox server. I decided to volunteer since I was pretty broke, and I thought to myself, hey, my art is pretty decent. So we then DM'd each other about it. I finished and he pays me. We keep talking for a few months and now I consider him a really great friend. I realize now looking back on it though, that he was grooming me. For a while we stopped talking and then I DM'd him again asking if he wanted another art commission. He asked for a picture of me, and I sent one. He said that I was very beautiful and stunning. I don't really remember how it happened, but he ended up manipulating me into sending him inappropriate pictures of me for Robux. That night, I cried myself to sleep. I was in a very vulnerable state at the time, and I had lost someone that I had been really close with. All the stuff he was doing took a toll on my mental health and other things. He continued asking me for photos and videos of me doing vulgar things to myself and for the camera. It actually got to the point where I just wanted to die. I tried to stop, and I told other people to spread the word about him on Discord, but there was a problem. He found out about this, and then he threatened me, saying that if I told anyone he would expose my photos and other things in his YouTube channel, and I was scared that I couldn't tell anyone. This guy actually had around 70,000 subscribers. I felt like I was trapped in a bubble of water with no way out. After about a month, it had finally settled down and ended, or so I thought. My mom went through my phone and she saw the things that he said to me. I was victim shamed, and I told my mom that I wanted to die. It was rough. A few months later, I ended up in a mental hospital for intent to kill myself. It really helped me through this. I'm finally on the meds that I needed and I'm slowly getting better now. I then blocked him and all of the people he was friends with on every social media my mom didn't delete. And that's the story for now. I'm honestly doing much better now, but this really did take a toll on me and my mental health. I met this guy online about 8 years ago now, on an online avatar chat simulator type thing called MVU. Even back then, it was mostly used by children lying about their age and creepy older people looking to get it on in the virtual space. My best friend Jasmine and I actively used this app/game, or whatever you want to call it, when we were both about 14 years old. I met this man by random chance, as MVU used to have a feature where you could be connected to a random stranger to chat with. I don't really remember too much about our first meeting other than he was very calm and collected, as well as extremely suave and charming. He told me his name was Wesley, and I introduced myself, and we established that we lived very close to one another, just a few towns away. He told me he was 20, and I told him I was 18. He obviously knew that was a lie. I offered to introduce him to Jasmine, as we talked about and shared everything at the time, and he was very excited by this. Jasmine also claimed to be 18. The three of us chatted for a bit in cyberspace, but quickly our new friend proposed that we all get in a three-way call together on the phone. Jasmine and I were already on the phone together as we were chatting with Wesley, and I remember us both squealing like the little teenage girls that we were. We were both very charmed by this mysterious older man who was making very flirtatious comments at us both, and we quickly dialed him into our call. The three of us talked for quite a few hours that night. If it wasn't completely obvious to him that we were not 18 before then, it would have become abundantly clear then. But still, he continued making flirtatious comments directed at the both of us, and we were smitten. Jasmine and I were not the most popular or conventionally attractive kids, so we really ate up all of the attention. Fast forward to some time later. Jasmine and I are both frequently talking to this guy, both together and while apart. We'd migrated to Skype for chatting, no video calling though, and we still frequently did our three-way phone calls. Jasmine and I were getting kind of competitive over this guy, as we both really liked him quite a lot, and we started occasionally fighting over who would have him. We'd sent him a photo of the two of us together in it. Again, further cementing to him that we were obviously way underage, and we'd received a photo of him as well. He was very skinny, had long black curly hair, looked very greasy, and was wearing sunglasses inside. Wesley was still making inappropriate comments towards us both, but had never crossed a line, that is, until one fateful night. Jasmine needed to go to bed and she left our three-way phone call, so Wesley and I were left all alone. Wesley made a comment towards me saying that he always thought I was prettier than Jasmine, but to never tell her that. This made me feel like I was victorious in this weird little battle Jasmine and I were waging, but the compliment came with a condition. The way he'd worded it was basically that he knew I was better than Jasmine because he knew that I would do things with him that Jasmine was too afraid to do. Sexual things. Me, being a very try-hard teenager who was trying to one-up my friend, of course said yes to this. That was the first night that he coerced me into having phone sex with him. Later on, I found out that he'd actually approached Jasmine with this proposition first, and she also complied, but didn't tell me about it until a while after. One-on-one phone sex with us both, then one day, a few weeks later, turned into a three-way phone sex with both of us. After that point, he approached us both together and asked if we would both be his, which was a compromise. No more fighting. We'd share him. We agreed, and after we did, things only grew more hostile between Jasmine and I behind the scenes. But in front of him, he told us we needed to behave. As time went on and we'd become more acquainted with one another sexually, his requests and demands of the two of us started growing more perverted, vulgar, and absolutely disgusting. With the two of us now together, he'd start delving into BDSM and violence, talking about beating us. With me privately, he started talking to me about incest and trying to coerce girls younger than me to be his slaves. Jasmine told me that privately he'd talk to her about bestiality, like trying to have her do things with animals and kidnapping her. We were both very scared at this point, with it no longer really being fun for either of us. But Wesley was constantly assuring the both of us privately that we were his favorite, and that made us both continue, trying to one-up the other and win the prize. All of this eventually built up to the day that Wesley told Jasmine and I that he was coming through our town on business. I don't think he ever really told either of us what he did for a living, just that it involved him constantly driving along the east coast of our state. Wesley was determined to meet with the both of us. Me having a very strict father who didn't even let me go to the mall for an hour without a chaperone or on school supervised trips, I just knew that I would never be able to make that happen. My dad would ask way too many questions about it. Jasmine, however, lived alone with her mom, who typically didn't really care where she was at any point. My fear of my dad was enough to trump even this guy's persuasion. But Jasmine, well, she eventually agreed to go and meet this guy. Part of me was scared for her, and part of me was really jealous. I knew this would mean that she won our battle, but part of me was okay with that. Thinking back on it, not meeting up with him is possibly one of the best choices I ever made. Jasmine to this day is so traumatized by what happened to her that day. To this day, she still hasn't revealed all of the details to me. Bringing it up or talking about it makes her go into a panic attack. What she did tell me was that the two of them met at a local chain restaurant. He took her to some apartment, and she was there with him for 10 hours, trapped until he eventually got bored with her and took her home. She absolutely insists that she wasn't raped, but I just don't know if I fully believe her. All I know is that he did things to her that she won't speak of, and we share everything with one another. I don't know why she never called the cops. I don't know why I never called the cops. She never got the license plate number or anything either. I think we were both just so scared of getting caught by our parents and getting in trouble that the idea of calling the police was just out of the question for us both. I know, stupid. After Jasmine's encounter with Wesley, neither of us ever spoke to him ever again. Not on MVU, Skype, or the phone. The prospect that he knew her home address scared us both, but as far as we know, he never showed up there. Fast forward 4 years later, making me about 18 years old now. Neither Jasmine or I have talked to Wesley in years. I still would think about him and what happened to Jasmine pretty frequently. She and I were both pretty traumatized, especially her, and were the only two that knew about this man and his actions. Then one day, my mom came home from the dollar store and she told me that she'd met a man there who said he knew me. For reference, my mom has very early onset dementia, and at this point she was not thinking or acting as clearly as she could have been. He talked to her while she was checking out and helped her put away her things into her car. I was kind of confused, not really knowing who it could have been at first. Then he said that his name was Wesley. And I froze. My heart felt like it was absolutely going to explode. She then described him to me, and it sounded like it could have been him, but she said that he had shorter hair and a beard. I had only ever known one person in my life named Wesley at this point, but still, I held on to hope that it wasn't him. I asked her if he said where he knew me from, and she said she didn't ask, but that he'd said we were old friends. I pressed her with questions very frantically, and she said she was very confused by them. Apparently, he'd helped her put her groceries in the car while talking about me and my schooling, and then he said goodbye to her and she left. I then asked my mom if she knew how he knew her as my mom. Again, she said she didn't ask. I don't know how this man was able to identify my mother or why he was in my town. I don't know why so many years later he's not only still interested in me, but interested enough in me to know who my mother was without me ever sending him a photo of my mom or telling him anything about her. I can only imagine that he must have been stalking me or her, but I don't really know how. I really hope he didn't have my home address, but considering that I lived in an area that was very off in the middle of nowhere, I don't really know if he did. After my mom disclosed what school I went to, I wonder if he'd ever showed up there. I wonder if he got my mom's license plate number that day. Jasmine was still living in that same house he dropped her off at that night, even then. I wonder if he'd paid her house any visits. I wonder if he ever saw us together. As it currently stands, I've never seen him, and Jasmine's never seen him since the day they met up, and my mom never saw him again after that day at the store. Even after that encounter, I was too paralyzed with fear of what my dad would do to me to tell anyone about him, even though I knew that my family and I could be in great danger. I know, I'm an absolute fool for this. It's way too late now, I think, and I really regret not doing anything every day of my life. It's one of my life's biggest regrets. Even if I wanted to try and do something later on, I don't actually know what could have been done. I think if he was stalking me, he's probably given up by now. I've moved houses several times since then, and now live in a different city. Jasmine also lives in a different city now as well. Still though, even now, every time I see a car parked way too close to me, or a guy that resembles how he looked, I just freeze and I start to wonder. I can't even hear the name Wesley or his last name without getting flashbacks. I don't know whatever happened to him. I don't know what he did to my best friend. I don't know how he managed to find my mom 4 years later, and I honestly don't know how I'm still safe. But thank God I am. Wesley, wherever you are, I really pray and hope you never do what you did to me and my friend to any other young girls. You're one very sick individual. This happened to me about a week ago. I found a summer job at our local supermarket about 2 weeks in. I got asked to work the late night shift, 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. I accepted since I was pretty in need of money and I never went to sleep early anyways. Everything was fine and dandy until about 3 a.m. when a shirtless, scarred-up guy came into the store. After lingering around the store for a while, he quickly came up to the counter, making intense eye contact with me. As I was about to ask him if he needed any help, he then said to me,
"Don't you dare move."
I couldn't really hear him at first, so I asked him if he could repeat that. At that point, he got agitated and then yelled,
"Make another sound and I'll slice you up."
And in a very swift motion, he vaulted over the counter going to the alcohol section, trying to grab a bottle of whiskey. Thankfully, the owner has hid a baseball bat under the counter. The moment he turned his back to me, I took the bat and swung full force at his knee. He winced in pain and tried to get up. I held the bat up again, acting like I was going to hit him once more, just to see him pull out a homemade shiv of some sort. I let him get up, and the moment he got up, he swung his shiv at me, lightly lacerating my wrist. I pushed him back with my bat and ran out of the store and got out. The next day after, I decided to call the cops and showed them the security footage, but they haven't contacted me since. I think it's safe to say that I won't be working the late night shift again for a really long time. It was just way too creepy for me. This happened a really long time ago, so my recollection of this isn't going to be word for word, but here goes. I'm a teenager and me and my mother live alone. We live basically in the middle of nowhere. The nearest town is a little less than an hour away, and the only things we have near us are a gas station and a bar. I know everyone who lives near me, and we rarely ever see new people in our neck of the woods. So just seeing someone who isn't familiar is suspicious enough, so this was pretty creepy. A couple of years ago, it was the middle of the night and me and my mother are night owls. We like to be awake from that midnight to 6 a.m. time period that most people prefer to be sleeping during. My mother was watching TV in the living room and I was using the computer in the kitchen. The kitchen and the living room are basically connected, so I wasn't too far away from her. Only a few feet. The front door leads right into the living room. It's a door with about 9 windows, so it's pretty easy to see inside. My mom looked towards the door, and she said that she saw somebody staring at her through the window, and he was wearing a hood that obscured almost all of his face. My mom jumped, and she of course walked to the door and asked him what the heck he was doing. According to my mother, he looked pretty young, but she could barely see his face, so who really knows how old he was. The man said something along the lines of,
Could you please help me with my car?"
in a tone that I can only describe as miserable and very off-putting. Even though it was dark out, there should have been enough light for her to see a car, but there was no car. The man was also holding his hands in his pockets pretty tight. My mother said no, but that she was sorry she couldn't help. This caused him to grip whatever it was in his pockets even tighter, so tight that it caused his arms to tremble. He stayed for a few more minutes and then had swiftly disappeared. Throughout the night, maybe 1 or 2 hours later, we thought that we had heard some slight weeping, but we didn't see anyone at any of our doors or windows. I might just be making assumptions here, but I can only assume it was a weapon that he was holding in his pockets. This was a really creepy experience, and it's safe to say he was probably going to lure my mother out of the house so he could do something sinister to her. About a year ago, there was a very small metal plate jammed between the front door strike plate and the piece that goes inside of it. I'm not really sure what it's called. We have zero idea where this metal plate came from, but the metal plate stopped our doors from locking, so I'm assuming it was put there so that somebody could get in later. These two situations are probably not related, but in hindsight, it really made me think about him because this was deliberately placed there by somebody, and we're not really sure why. Anyway, I'm just really glad we ended up being okay and nothing bad actually happened, but it's still pretty creepy. I lived alone on the 4th floor of an on-campus apartment building when I was in college. Early one morning, around 3 a.m., I was awakened by a knock at my door. I got up half asleep and went to the door and peeked out of the peephole. There was a large guy standing on the other side of my door. I'd lived in the building for a while and I knew my neighbors pretty well, but this guy was unfamiliar to me. I didn't open the door, but called out to the guy in the hall. "What do you want?"
I need to use your phone.
He answered. "Dude, what? It's like 3 a.m. I told him.
Yeah, I know. My car is broke down outside. I need to use your phone.
The guy said. I was still pretty blurry-eyed and foggy-headed, but something just seemed so weird about this guy, so I refused to open the door. The guy got frustrated, saying he was in need and I was not being neighborly and nice. I still refused to open the door, and then he started insulting me. Finally, after repeated refusals to open the door, he then left and I went back to bed. I didn't really think much of it until the next day when I was sitting in class going over the whole event in my head. It really struck me as very odd that this guy would choose my apartment to go to and ask for help. After all, I lived on the 4th floor in the middle of the hall. He didn't knock on any of the other doors, just mine. When he left my apartment, he didn't try any of the other neighbors. He just left the building. I realized at that moment that he had likely targeted me. If I had lived on the 1st floor near the doors, I might have let it go, but on the 4th? He had gone up 4 flights of stairs and halfway down the hall just to ask to use my phone? Yeah, right. The thought alone put a cold lump in my stomach, especially when I started to remember that there was a payphone in the lobby of the building. Even now, I get chills whenever I think about what might have happened if I had opened my door. I honestly almost did because around that age I always wanted to be liked. Fortunately, my gut instinct won out and I'm here to tell the tale. Thank God nothing happened.
Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r Let's Read Official, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.